I know who I am. We are a chosen generation. We've been called for to show His excellence. All I require for life, God has given me. I know who I am. I know who God says I am. What He says I am. Where He says I'm at. I know who I am. I know who God says I am. What He says I am. Where He says I'm at. I know who I am. I'm working in power. I'm working miracles. I live a life of favor. For I know who I am. I'm working in power. I'm working miracles. I live.
A pleasant good morning to all listeners locked on to Hope 103.1 FM. It's Wednesday, the 20th of October, 2021. And it's at this time, we join Reverend John Lewis for a very informative, blessed information on leadership. Good morning, Reverend John. How are you today?
Great. Good morning to you.
How are you doing today?
Wonderful. It's a great day, and we give God thanks for this new day that He has made. We will be glad and we will rejoice in it.
Most definitely. And today we're here talking about leadership, and we understand how important it is to have godly, correct, focus and great leadership in these trying times. Today we're looking at leadership test. Leadership test. Could you further elaborate? What are we talking about this morning?
Great. So life's tests that reveal a leader's potential and maturity. And the biblical background in Psalm 26 verse 2, examine me, O Lord, and try me, test my mind and heart. So nearly in every moment of life is a test. However, there are seasons of testing that can be identified, understood. Tests are common to all of us, whether we were in primary, elementary, secondary, graduate, postgraduate school. Those are in the academic sense, but life itself has its own way of testing us for our level of maturity, testing us in the areas of our own performances. And passing the test is the pathway to progress and promotion. So we do not graduate unless we have passed our tests in leadership, passed our tests in life in the different phases and different levels of our formations and growth, and the potential that God has given us to become the best leader during these challenging times as well.
Right. So the text is basically saying that the leaders need to be tested. But what is the general objective of leaders being tested? We also notice that products are also being tested. So are they being tested for the same reason? And if no, why are leaders tested?
Great. So a definition of testing then, just to set the framework, is an opportunity which challenge leaders to demonstrate the potential and maturity. And tests reveal through the test our inward poverty. The test reveals you have increasingly responded poorly and have failed to act obediently. Secondly, there's the inward plateau. The test reveals you have not matured but have become stagnant in your growth. And then is the upward progress. The test reveals you have grown and have responded better than ever. So tests are at different levels. We test our products to ensure that they're good for this edible. Of course, these are challenging days of testing. As you know, in the pandemic, we're testing all the vaccinations and all the other kinds of tablets that they're recommending. So they have to pass the rigid test before they can administer these food and vaccinations in particular to people. So that's on the natural sense, but more on a deeper level in terms of testing our spiritual growth, because we can be growing physically and we put on weight, we get taller, or we put on muscles and we function well physically, but
Yes.
sometimes it does not validate our spiritual growth,
Mm-hmm.
because our spiritual growth has to be linked to a personal encounter with God, as you know, a
Mm-hmm.
personal relationship with God. So we have to measure our spiritual growth in a way. There's a different measurement for our growth in a physical realm, in our emotional realm, and in our spiritual realm. These days, we are talking a lot about emotional intelligence, and so that people can be of age, as we would say, and yet their emotional intelligence is not equivalent to the age number that we carry. So
Mm-hmm.
those are concerns in terms of how we measure our own maturity
Mm-hmm.
and how we measure our potential from where we were, where we are, and where we want to be.
Mm-hmm. So testing, it ensures that we're talking about leadership, that the leader is ready and mature enough to handle the heritage of the Lord. Because as a leader in the body of Christ, you're not really dealing with your children, let's say biologically, or maybe so, but more or less you're handling the heritage of the Lord, and the Lord has to ensure that you are well fitted to handle his children. Yes?
Yes, there are many biblical examples of this.
Yes.
You see that in the life of Abraham,
Mm-hmm.
how he was tested. Genesis 22 and verses 1 to 9 to 13. How he was tested in his faith and work for God, and it was his faith and faithfulness, and that he passed the test of faith successfully,
Mm-hmm.
proving that he had settled the issues of obedience and lordship. So he was willing to go wherever God had led him. And there are other passages that talks about the tests that God gives to us. For the righteous, God tests the hearts and minds.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the psalmist says, "They have tried my heart, or thou hast tried my heart, thou hast visited me by night, thou hast tested me, and thus find nothing. I have purpose that my mouth will not transgress." And then he asked God to examine him. He said, "Examine me, O Lord, and try me, test my mind and my heart. Search me, O my God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there be any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." So it's a genuine desire, and it's an honest appeal to God to do an inward test, an inward evaluation, an inward assessment, and that can really give us a true picture of ourselves and how those tests affects us, and how we judge ourselves and measure our own success in terms of passing those primary tests. Test yourselves and see if you're examine yourselves. And so it calls for self-examination. When we do our self-examination and are honest with ourselves, we tend to pass the other tests in life and that would come our way. Um, and there are many challenges to our own testings of faithfulness, testings of credibility, integrity, um, and those are the issues that we have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to every stage of our life. We experience threats and testings at every stage of our lives. And testings come in different ways and different means.
Mm-hmm.
Our goal should be to pass every test. We may not be successful,
Mm-hmm.
at every test, but that's the goal. And testing precedes possibilities.
Right.
When we have passed those tests successfully, we move on to the next level and we are able to experience new possibilities and new potentials about the test that we have come through.
Reverend John, you mentioned about testing or analyzing yourself. Is it wise that you, in those moments, have another eye, another person, help you analyze where you are, or is it that you sit with the Word of God? I know what's the process of testing yourself, and is it wise that you get help to test you or to see where there may be flaws and you need help?
It's on both sides, where you first of all honest with yourself, honest before God. He
Mm-hmm.
actually knows everything about you already.
Yes.
So that's the starting point. But then you get a sense of how you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
um, and how people evaluate your life, because sometimes we have a blind spot. We all have blind spots,
Yes. Okay.
and it takes good, mature people in our life to point them out in a way that is not destructive to us, but rather the intent of the observation and assessment and evaluation of our lives. It's only to make us better people and to
Right.
point out where we can improve in areas of weakness or where we may have failed some tests in our lives.
Okay, so are there standard tests or are there different tests that bring out different results in a person? Could you take us through some of those tests if there are different ones?
Great. So, um, right. So there are different kinds of tests. Um, One of the illustrations that we experience is that the test of small things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Test comes to prove our faithfulness and potential for greater opportunities. So there are 10 tests that prove leadership potential and maturity. So
Mm-hmm.
how do we handle the small things? It's very important. Um, and we have many examples of that in scripture,
Mm-hmm.
how we responsibilities with the different talents and you're proven to be faithful in a particular field that is not very visible or highly rated, but you're diligent at the little things, as it were, that perhaps it is behind the scenes kind of work. People don't see you on the stage or on the platforms, but you are there faithfully plugging away. And that's a test that determines whether God will open other doors for you as well. So that's one of the testings that is very critical to pass. Because if we don't
Mm-hmm.
pass those tests, normally we don't move on to the next class,
Right.
as we would say, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of being a student in the testing of small things, making the most of your opportunity because the days are evil.
Mm-hmm.
He that is faithful in very little things is faithful also in much. And he who is unrighteous in very little things is unrighteous also in much. So God does not pile on responsibilities on us if we are found to be unfaithful in what is considered to be the small things or what we consider to be the things that are not very grand. So sometimes you ask to um, be the person who arrange the pews or the church
Mm-hmm.
to make sure it is kept well, or you're asked to provide equipment, set it up. People may not see the kind of work that you do. People who make sure that the building is sanitized now,
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of work, but those are significant work and important work. And you may not be the speaker for the day on the platform, but as you serve in areas that may be considered insignificant, but it propels you into greater worlds of faithfulness, because God always rewards faithfulness for work done that sometimes we are not appreciated for, not you know rated for, or we are not given rewards for. But God is the one who keeps the proper scores
Yes.
and keeps the proper records.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, and then there is the motivational test, motivation test. What is it that motivates you? Um, you're not doing this because of an ulterior motive, but you're judging your own motive for doing this. Test comes to the one who is doing right to examine why they are doing it. Um, and one example of this is in the life of Job.
Mhm.
Then Satan answered the Lord, does Job fear God for nothing? Hast thou not made a hedge about him and his house and all that he has on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But put forth thine hand now and touch all of that he has, and he will surely curse thee to thy face. You know that never happened.
Mhm.
In the midst of all the trials and testings
Yeah.
that Job experienced, he never gave up his hope, his faith in God. So, what is it that motivates us? And we cannot judge people's motives for doing what they're doing, but you can judge your own motive. We can judge our own motive for why we do what we do, whether it is for our own self aggrandizement or but rather it is to bring honor and to bless the lives of others that people bring around us. So there is a test of small things, a test your motivation, and then stewardship tests. This test proves how strategically and generously we handle the resources we present and that we can have control of. And again, that has to do with our sense of integrity and honesty in how we steward the resources that God puts in our path. One of the challenges of stewardship is how do we handle resources
Mm.
that are designated for particular use. For example, during these times of crises, people give and donate to particular issues surrounding the pandemic. They will say the grant or the fund is to buy material that would protect us from us, for example.
Yeah.
We cannot just use those funds for anything else because they are designated funds. Like if we have a disaster, funds donated for disaster relief work is not, for your particular pet project, completing something that you feel is personally important to you, but designated resources are to be used solely and primarily for those purposes. And when we do that, then there's a tendency for people to evaluate your integrity
Okay.
and to invest in what you're doing, whether it's in your business world, whether it's in your church, whether it's in government. People assess your level of integrity, how you manage resources, and you're a good steward for what people give and invest in your life. So those are three of the initial tests that proves your leadership potential and maturity as well. There is another test that is referred to as the wilderness test. This comes when you're spiritually dry to reveal your potential for change and growth. Each leader, each person goes through the test that is referred to as a wilderness test. A time when you feel drained, you may feel anxious, or even get to the place where there are levels of burnout. And how do you recover out of those times of loneliness? Because especially in the pandemic, we are noticing that the stress level it has increased, even among children, coping with online studies, students in their work, people in their business. Things are in flux and not a great level of certainty. And how do we come through those difficult times in order to pass that kind of wilderness test? And perhaps today, as you listen to this program, you may be going through times that looks like it's a wilderness, times of uncertainty, times of challenges, times of difficulties, and how do you overcome those? And of course, our first advice, of course, is to direct you to the God who gives hope and gives direction. But also, in times like these, we need to seek the help of others that have the skills, the professional training, when we deal with anxiety, when we deal with depression, and those kind of issues, how we deal with fear, how we deal with loss, and how we deal with grief, and those issues as well.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, we are inside of Leadership Plus, and we are chatting with Reverend John Lewis, and today we're talking about the Leadership Test. We're speaking about the importance of testing, and if you have any questions and or comments, feel free to send them in on 403-1031, and they will be addressed by Reverend John. Reverend John, could you continue telling us about the different tests and what it brings out of the leader?
Great. So number 5 then is what is referred to as a celebrity test. This test displays our ability and integrity to see if we compromise under pressure. So it's a test to check on how we deal with compromise and how we assess our own levels of integrity. And so that's a critical area. Sometimes we may think that we have arrived in a particular field of work or field of leadership, whether it's in the business, community, the church, or government, and become careless in our level of integrity. And there's the temptation, the pressure to compromise, and it's how do we come out of those situations untarnished, and come out with keeping our integrity in place, our credibility in place. And all of us will face those kind of testing, whether it is test to law or standards in areas of our morality, in terms of our responses to resources, for our leadership positions, and responsibility for others, challenges to levels of our integrity and how we respond to those. And that's why we talked about grounding values in those levels of honesty, truthfulness. Of course, all over the world, there's so many issues facing men and women alike in power and positions of power and authority, whose levels are questioned, levels of integrity and honesty have been questioned. And so it is how do we pass those tests? And so it calls for daily evaluation. Sometimes we may overcome those tests to compromise one day at a time, and they come back at us in different ways. And so how we seek in the stands of a biblical perspective, how we seek divine help, divine presence in the midst of the temptation to compromise our faith and compromise our work with God. And one of the things that we may tend to look to compromise is how we look at the outward stature of people. So we show greater respect for those who seek to be more prominent, men and women in power and authority, and buy into their values, which may not necessarily have the value honesty. You remember when God sent Samuel to seek out a king, and how he responded when he saw these handsome men at first,
Mm-hmm.
these tall, not sure if they were dark and handsome, but of course, Samuel himself was attracted to the physical appearance.
Yes.
And but the Lord said, Samuel, do not look at his appearance
Mm-hmm.
or at the height of his stature,
Mm-hmm.
because I have rejected him. And that's before David, of course. For God sees not as a man sees. For man look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So God is not necessarily impressed in the physical appearance and stature of people, but at the heart of people. That's why he chose David in this particular circumstance. So God looks at the heart of each person, and God uses those people whose heart are like his, and has a heart for God.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the test of authority. This test comes to expose your attitude and willing submission towards God-given authority. So
Mm-hmm.
we cannot flaunt our own preference when God has put someone in authority over us. And so acknowledge that this is the leader that God has raised up, whether it's in the business community, whether it's in the church, whether it's in government even, and have a sense that God's hand is upon this leader,
Mm-hmm.
and how we submit to that. Because it boils down to the fact that we reject submission to a God-given authority, we're actually rejecting God's authority
And
over our
God
lives
takes
as
that
well.
very serious. When we look at, the example with Moses, when Miriam, his sister, you know, in a light way disrespected him, or, did not acknowledge him as a total leader per se. But we see how God responded to, the disregard for the leadership, though he was, I think, younger than she was. So God takes leadership very serious.
Exactly. So this is when it comes to choices of people that we want to make leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we make the same mistakes like Samuel did initially.
Right.
We look at the physical appearance, how commanding they may look, or what power or privilege or place of influence they might have. Or they may have a particular name in a country, in an island. They're known, to be influential people or business people,
Mm-hmm.
I would say. They have arrived at the last ladder of success
Right.
and the highest level of success in a country or nation.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we want to nominate those kinds of people for particular positions of leadership. And sad to say, sometimes we carry those concepts over into church positions of leadership,
Mm-hmm.
depending on what job or positions they hold in the field of business or commerce and industry, and assign them to particular roles and function in the church.
Mm-hmm.
But spiritual leadership is a different ball game, as we would say. Spiritual leadership is first and foremost given to the people of faith and given to people of spiritual maturity. And so, as the scripture says, do not give leadership to a new convert in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we may bring persons in the business community who have become believers, and we want to utilize their gifts and skills, of course, and that's wonderful. But still, to recognize that very often they are still new and young converts that needs to be discipled in the faith and the fear of God. So that's a test for all of us when we are making selections and we have the right and to vote on certain positions of leadership within our sphere of influence. So how well do we pass those tests in terms of doing careful assessment and doing the hard work of doing the background study, and we can make serious mistakes when we appoint people in positions of leadership that are not qualified to go to maturity in terms of the church and spiritual matters. It is more difficult to get them out of those positions than to get them in.
Okay.
So we have to be warned about that. And then an interesting test. It's called the forgiveness test. This test comes to show you're not easily offended and are ready to forgive others. Yes, so people, we get offended. People would trespass against us, as we say. People will hurt us in ways that perhaps they don't realize, offend us. But as Hebrews says, pursue peace with all men. See to it that no one comes to abort the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up in you to cause trouble, and that because of this many become defiled. And whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your prayers will not be hindered. So that's a serious test for us. I mean, if God would not answer your prayer, that's a serious matter.
Exactly.
Yes, you really can't get much done without God hearing your prayer. So forgive people who perhaps they may not even realize that they have offended you, or they may not even appreciate the fact that they have, trespassed against you and cause hurt or harm to your life, and go on their own good way, as we say, their own happy way.
Yeah.
But you don't want to hold any spirit of bitterness in your heart, because the person that is hurting is you. You're the one who gets hurt. Yeah, when you hold bitterness or you're angry at someone, anger has its own debilitating effect and impact upon our physical health as well. Anger can cause us to become ill and sick, and we cannot function because we allow these people to influence our thoughts, even they don't have a clue what they have done to you.
Yeah.
So how we deal with our own pain and so pass it on to the Father who forgives us, so that He can hear our prayer and that He could answer us in times of need. And then number 8, there is what is called, you're standing in a place of warfare. This test exposes your ability to stand when you're in God's will and experience adversity. Now, adversity comes to everyone at some point or the other. Situations may not be as dominant or prominent as others. Your adversity may be totally different than others. Adversity for one person may be a different kind of experience that the other person has. But warfare and adversity is just natural part of life. And again, we cannot help but reflect upon the number of persons we have lost here in Grenada, but around the world through this pandemic. Loss of family members, loss of members of our churches, of our communities, and people that we know. If they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. This is a reflection on the people of Israel, of course. If you have run with the footmen and they have tied you out, how can you compete with the horses? If you fall down in the land of peace, how will you do it in the thickest of the battle of Jordan? So warfare is a natural part of our testing. Spiritual warfare is a whole new subject, but leadership has to do with how we defend and how we practice responses to the warfares that affect us. The enemy of quiet, and we may have won a war yesterday or last week, last month, but he brings the battle back to us each day that we live, and how we win those battles. We win them, of course, from the spiritual perspective, on our knees and in our prayers and intercession, and others who pray for us. So it's important to have a network of people who support you in prayer and support you in your life as a person. You must have at least 3 persons pray for you regularly. So that's another test that we'll all face as well. And then moving along, the test of time. This test reveals the quality of your work based on both opportunity and longevity. The example here is that of Esther. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. And let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not grow weary. The test of time. And all of us go through those tests through our lifetime. And how do we overcome the trials and tests of our time? Sometimes we do very well at a particular period of life. Some of our youth, some of our children, young people, go through particular testings in their teenage years. Some handle them better than others through unscathingly, not impacted by all the trials and testings, and some go through and fall beneath the weight of the test of time during those difficult years. Some even in young adult or even in midlife and even in older age. But in every phase of life and phase of times, we experience but it's a test the quality of our work. And but when we pass those tests, when we overcome the test of time, it creates and provides other opportunities and give us longevity in work that we do.
Right.
So those are important markers to look for. And so when we fail on these tests, we fall down, but we get back up. Yes.
Yes.
We may pass some of these tests with flying colors, as we say, and we may fail them, terribly. And then how do we? So we have to check ourselves. Which tests are we going through right now?
Mm-hmm.
Because every person are experienced some kind of test in their life at this particular time. So as we review a little bit about perhaps the areas of tests that you go through, and then number 10, and from the Christian biblical perspective, the Lordship Test. This test usually occurs in one of your areas of strength. You find it difficult to trust God. It reveals your heart response to whom and what has the final authority in your life. And so for us, when we talk about Christian leadership, is Jesus Christ really the Lord of our lives? To whom do we listen to whose drum beat are we marching to? Whose perspective do we rely on to give us guidance and hope? Is it the greatest leader of all times who walked the face of this earth, Jesus Christ himself? And that's where we take our starting point from. We take our mandate from him. We take our initiatives that he has given to us to become great leaders. Mm-hmm. So which of these tests have you experienced? And we can review them a little bit. So the test of the Lordship, test of time, test of warfare, test of forgiveness, test of authority, the celebrity test, the wilderness test. And those are some of the critical tests that we have faced, I'm sure, during these times and during the situations the motivation test, the stewardship test, credibility test, the test of small things. There was 10 tests, and all of us at some point, either we have come through those tests already, or we will go through them, or we may be experiencing a particular test in this time of our life.
Right. So you've mentioned that if each person will go through these testings from time to time, I have a few questions. How does one know he or she is being tested? And in that period of testing, I said period, is there a timeline? I know that you're supposed to pass this test, and if you didn't rather, you have to go over it again. Is there a timeline, and how does one know that he or she is being tested?
Great. So we all experience tests at each stage of our growth. And these definitions help us to identify a particular test. Because we tend to lump our testings into one big concept or idea. So as you do an evaluation, what test am I experiencing now? We would tend to complain that, boy, life is full of trials and testings.
Exactly.
But we are not able to identify a particular kind of testings but if we have this as a guide, what is it that we're dealing with right now? For example, how are you coping with the tests? How are you responding to your leader, to your pastor, to your bishop in your church, or to your manager, or to your senator, or to your parliamentarian, if you have responsibility to those kinds of people. So that's a test of how you respond to authority that you understand and respect, as that God has put you under this authority. Some of us do not do a good job at responding to authority. We think that, who put you in charge, or who make you my boss, or who put you over me. But when you understand that God has a sense of order in the universe, like he says, look, I created all this for you. I put you in charge of them, manage them well. And he defines those kinds of roles for us. And that's one example. How do you deal with the motivation test, for example? So check your heart, check those lessons within the heart of the leader. Do an honest heart check each day that we live. What is it that compels me to get up and do what I do? And what it is that enables me, and I want to be enthusiastic. I want to be involved with this. I want to be a part of this. And, I can't wait to get the day started. What is it that motivates you? So this acts as a guide. You may have some overlapping in some cases, but it really helps us to clarify our motives, our credibility. Am I an honest person? If I were to make that decision, how will it benefit the other person rather than how will it benefit me? So it's other-centered. And would people judge you in the future for decisions that you have taken that were not credible? Integrity, forgiveness. Do you forgive yourself? And do you forgive others for things that they have done to you? So what tests you may be facing now? And so you have to evaluate that. You have to assess that. Test of small things. You're not doing the big things. You're not on the stage, on the platform. You're doing something behind the scenes. People don't know what you do what you're doing. But faithfulness in the small things makes room for you for the other things that God has in store for you. So these are 10 categories, as it were. And of course, we have to give credit for the material that we use. It's through the John Maxwell Company, of course, that we have used in our training called Equip. And so you may have done that program with us in the past. but it provides an opportunity for those of you who could not have done this physically to now benefit from the material. So just to give credit and to acknowledge that the material is not original um, from my end, but rather it is material that we have access through the training that we have provided in the past as
No.
well.
Mhm. I have another question. Can a person go through several tests at one time? Let's say 5 or
Well,
4.
well, that could be a trial of test, a series of testing. Yes, so you're dealing with forgiveness tests, you're dealing with the warfare test, so you're dealing with who is boss of your life, the leadership test. Is God really in control of your life, or are you trying to still manage your own life?
Yeah.
You're taking things in your hand and you're not willing to give it up to God.
Mm.
You know, in terms of your relationships, you want to be involved in this particular relationship. You think that God has nothing to do with that. I make my own. I'm a big man now. I'm a big woman now. I could choose my partner, my life partner.
Mhm.
You try to handle that on your own, only to find out that you're making a lot of mistake and get in trouble because Christ is not Lord of your relationships. And
Right.
that is critical for young people and young adults, singles, for example, who make those decisions about a life partner. This is a whole new discussion for family life and all that, but a hint in here to say that God
Mhm.
has interest in your personal life as well in terms of a life's partner, because that's a part, in addition to the decision you make about your salvation, experience with God. Choosing your life's partner is the second, perhaps the second most important decision that a person can make in their life. So yes, you can experience several of these things coming at you at the same time, but don't become muddled by it, because if you just bungle, to use a colloquial word, everything in one basket, it confuses you and you're not sure where's this coming from, what issue am I dealing with. Um, and so it helps to clarify and help you to understand what it is that drives you, motivates you. Um, so I think these are important descriptions of how tests may come to all of us in different times. So as you suggest, may come to us even at the same time and through a curveball, as we'd say. But how do we come out of it um, on the other side, as it were, with a passing grade?
Yes.
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 Yeah.
As it relates to testing, you say we may go through these tests, and it is true we may go through them at different times in our lives. Is it a one-off situation, or is it as you've matured on this level and you're going on to the next level, where you go through the same series of testing along the same lines, but maybe deeper, or do you go through it a one-off, or is it continuous as you grow from level to level?
Great. And sometimes we make great promises to God or to people
Mhm.
and fail them. You remember the story of Abraham and Isaac.
Mhm.
And Abraham says, I'll do whatever you said to do. But he faced the greatest test of his life of God asking him to sacrifice his one and only son.
Mhm.
You know the story very well. He's taken his only son up to this Mount Moriah, I believe. His son looks at his father and he says, look, we have everything else. We have wood, fire, we have the knife and all that, but where is the lamb? Who is it we're going to sacrifice? Or what it is for him, not knowing that in the heart of his father was him,
Mhm.
Isaac,
Mhm.
that God had asked him. But there was a test, test is the ultimate test, as it were, if you're willing to. And God saw that in him, and as you know very well, God did provide a lamb, a substitute for, but it was a test of his integrity and credibility. Um, and who was really Lord of his life? God. was indeed. So we go through those kinds of, we may not so son or daughter, hopefully not, but there may be other areas that God may be testing us, whether how do we give to Him, sacrificially, especially when the times are hard and we want to withhold the giving that we should be involved in. You say, boy, we have to squeeze back this month because things look rough. So it's a test of our integrity and faithfulness to God. Because the promise is that once you become obedient in that field, God blesses you. And all of us experience that when we are obedient in terms of giving to God and His kingdom, how He multiplies the little that we may be left with to ensure that we get through the month and the month ahead. But that's a temptation for our credibility as well. And there are many other examples, that we can use in terms of the testings that we might have. Sometimes we feel that we are not promoted quickly enough. You may be in a position of a job for years and you realize that the boss is not taking note of you on your work. And that becomes a test of time. And God is the one who, promotion comes not from the east or from the west. Ultimately, God is the one who promotes. And your supervisor, your manager or boss may not recognize the need for promotion, but God is the one.
Every human, all of us from time to time, we do go through different tests. And, it all boils down to us trusting God. We really have to trust Him and put our confidence in Him, knowing that He knows what is best for our lives. Before we close off today's session, Reverend John, are there any final words you would like our listeners to learn of?
Great. So there's always an assessment that we like to leave before we go. So we have asked the question, which of the tests have you experienced this year? Have you passed them? So it's a question, and then the application is whatever test you're facing now, write down what you can do to exhibit your trust in God and your credibility to lead effectively. So that's an application for today. Whatever test you're facing now, write down what you can do to exhibit your trust in God and your credibility to lead effectively. So it calls to take notes, to write some things down so that you can reflect. As we said, nothing is really worthwhile unless it is reflected on. So the information, material that we receive really is not going to be of great benefit and use to us if it is not reflected upon and if it is not applied in our own lives. So I trust that we'll take time, even now or even after we have closed this this broadcast, to just think about your own life. Where am I today? And where I'm at in terms of my relationship with God, and how credible is my life in being a leader and a person of influence.
Thank you very much. This session really blessed because it's a blessed session. The information was very, very good, and it informs us that we as individuals and as leaders, we have to trust God and understand that we are His workmanship. And we may fail from time to time, but as Peter did, get up, dust yourself off, and move again. And as we yield ourselves to God's hand, He will make us more and more as He is. And I thank God for this session. I want to thank Reverend John again for joining with us and for sharing with us such pertinent information that will help all of our listeners. We have a comment coming in saying this is a great wealth of information and great questions from you. And we really thank you for providing those, sacrificing your time and being with us here another morning. Really, really thank you for this initiative. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's our session today for Leadership Plus And we are so happy to have been here with you. And we pray that God bless you and you enjoy the balance of your day. Looking forward to see you next week, God's will. Have a good one. Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you very much.